It's removing a lot of the other body parts from really getting in the way. For example, you're not working your glutes as much because you're not doing as much of a hip hinge or anything like that. So you're not actually having to do that hip extension. So your glutes are worked to a much smaller degree, as well as hamstrings. You're not working your hamstrings as much either. So it's more of an isolation lift for the quads, but it's not completely an isolation lift by any stretch of the imagination, because you're using two different joints, using the knee joint and the hip joint. The quadriceps consist of 4 distinct heads, and that's the reason why we call it the quads, is because there's actually 4 muscles contained within the overarching structure of the quadriceps, and that contains the rectus femoris, the vastus lateralis, the vastus intermedius, and the vastus medialis. All of them are very, very concentrated on quad extension, aka knee extension, so just straightening the leg out. And therefore, I think that we should be really focusing on exercises that do that function. Of course, there are a lot of muscles like the sartorius in the legs, which are responsible for hip flexion, so actually raising the knee up towards you. So that's also an important component. But the main function of the quads is that quad extension. So we're going to be starting with a isolation lift, and this is a very, very true isolation lift, the leg extension, which is just a quad extension. That's all we're doing. And I love this exercise because you are so locked into place. So you can really just focus on straightening your knee out, and it's just going to be working the quads in a fantastic way. So let's get into the first set here. I did so many reps there that I think that I can go up in weight, so I will do that. Now, beyond this just being a fantastic lift for the quads because it's working that knee extension in spades, I like beginning some of my leg workouts with this because it's kind of like a pre-exhaust exercise for the quads and the lower body. And whenever you can throw in like an isolation lift, you can automatically go super hard on that lift without it like taking a huge toll on you systemically and muscle wise. So it's just a great way to kind of liven up the quads, get them kind of fired up, get a bunch of blood flow, get a pump going, so that they're warmed up and ready to be used in other exercises like the leg press, which we are going to be hitting later on. Oh, yeah, that was better. That was definitely like a true failure set. At least it felt that way. Because I could not have gone any more with the bilateral movement of using both my legs. And then when I swapped to one leg at a time, while I cranked out a few more, that was definitely beyond that threshold. Now, this is an exercise that really shines by using a full range of motion, kind of doing like a pause at the bottom where the quads are the most lengthened, and then squeezing at the top where they're the most shortened or contracted. So that's really what I'm trying to do, and I hope that you guys notice that I'm really being deliberate with getting the full range of motion in this lift. And a way to even enhance the range of motion, in my opinion, is to bring the seat all the way back, no matter your height, and just lean as far back as you can. By doing that, you're actually creating a much greater stretch when the quads are fully back like this, which can enhance hypertrophy overall. So I'm just kind of like flattening my back a bit against the pad and holding on for dear life to the handlebars. And I find that really helps. And I'm going all the way down, touching the bottom, and then contracting at the top, doing a strong contraction. This is an exercise where I don't believe that you have to go super heavy on. You could be doing like 50% of your 1 rep max or something. And just by squeezing and pausing at the bottom, you're going to be really getting a lot out of it. In fact, I would discourage you from... I would discourage you from using a ton of weight and doing low reps. I just don't think that it's built for that. It is an isolation lift after all. It's only working the quads. You're not working the glutes. You're not working the hamstrings, nothing like that, you know? I bet that you're thinking, hey, what the hell? What are you doing at a seated hamstring curl? I thought that this was a quad-focused leg day. Well, it is, but I still think that it's important to include an antagonistic muscle group into the one that you're trying to target. So while, like if I were to do a hamstring focused day, then I would definitely include some quad work as well, just to balance it out. And it's just weird to hit one side of the body and not the other. But the real reason why I do this, the true reason, is because we want to be hitting our hamstrings to some capacity. Now, it will be hit on something like a leg press, which we're going to finish with, but not to the same degree as an isolation lift like the seated hamstring curl. And the reason why I'm trying to get some hamstring stimulus in the first place is so that we can keep that frequency high. If we just do like one quad-based leg day, then one hamstring-based leg day, we're only hitting a 1 time a week frequency, which we know that is suboptimal, because if you're just hitting a 1 time a week frequency, then you're going to be fully recovered by like day 3 or 4, even if you're going balls to the wall on legs. That's just how the human body works. And therefore, you're going to be leaving like 3 days out there in the nether where you're just resting up for no reason and not actually training again. So even though we're not doing a ton of volume, I'm only going to be doing 3 or 4 sets here. I still think that it's very important to include, just so that you get some sort of stimulus for growth. So your body's like, hey, we're still training these hamstrings. He's still training the hamstring, so we got to trigger some protein synthesis recovery responses as well. But why am I picking this hamstring exercise over all the other ones that I could choose? Isn't the barbell RDL a better exercise, for example? Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great exercise, but first of all, you're only working the hamstrings in the short or the lengthened position with that. You're only getting that stretch. You're not actually getting the contraction. This is working it in both ways. So that's why it's very important to do something like this, where you're actually getting the complete package. But it goes even a step further than that. I think that doing this lift in particular, this variation or the prone variation, is really important over other hamstring lifts, because it's not very systemically fatiguing. You can go balls to the wall on these exercises, and it's not going to like beat up your whole entire body as a whole in terms of recovery. So I think that that's really important, because the last thing we want to do is like totally gas ourselves out before we get to our major quad movement of the day. That would be a terrible idea, especially on a quad focused leg day. That would make it more of like a balanced leg day rather than anything else. And additionally, I'm separating it like this. I'm starting with a quad isolation knee extension lift, and then I'm doing this, and then finishing off with leg press instead of doing like this first and then 2 quad lifts, because I'm trying to break up the stimulus. So if we just put like 2 quad exercises back to back, then we're going to get some diminishing returns in how much effort we can give it, since our quads are just going to be so fatigued. Versus by starting with a quad movement and then breaking it up with a hamstring and antagonistic muscle group movements and then going back to quads, we're letting our quads recover the whole time, because while your hamstrings are working in this fashion, our quads are not. They're only working like isometrically just to resist the weight from going up or whatever, but that's not a huge deal at all. But what about the form on this lift? How should you guys be executing it? Well, I'm a huge proponent of actually leaning forward while you do each and every rep, because that is going to enhance the stretch that you are getting on the hamstrings by a large margin. Just try leaning forward, or stand up and lean forward and try and touch your toes, because that's basically what we're doing. We're just touching our toes. We're getting into this position, but we're seated instead of standing. And therefore, we're going to get a huge stretch, and a stretch under load has been shown time and time again to elicit more hypertrophy. So if your goal is hypertrophy with this movement, then I think that you should be leaning forward on each and every rep. And then additionally, I'm using the same logic that I applied to the quad extension machine, where I'm really like achieving both ranges of the motion. I'm going all the way up and pausing for a sec. I'm going all the way down and contracting for a second, and I'm making sure that I'm slow and deliberate with every single repetition that I perform. And I think that if you do all of those and you're really just focusing on the mind-muscle connection with the hamstrings, then you're going to be doing it perfectly right. Let me know if maybe there's some form cues that I'm missing, but this is a machine. It's not super technical. It's decently straightforward. They even have diagrams. But still, I mean, I might be missing something. So if I am, let me know. I would love that. Also, I love to crank out some partials at the very end after I've kind of hit failure, because the like top position is the most lengthened position, so you're actually getting a huge stretch. So just by cranking out some partials in that range of motion, we're adding more time under tension in the most hypertrophic zone, which I think is very important. Now, you don't have to be doing the partials, but I think if you're trying to get like that last like 5% growth that you probably could over the course of months, then I think that this is the secret to doing so. Lastly, we arrive at the final lift of today's session, which is the leg press. Now, I love doing this after like a more isolation pre-exhaust movement. I used to do this all the time before my 2 public programs that I released. I used to start with a leg extension and then get on to the compound lifts, because honestly, you don't have to go as heavy to get a huge stimulus after you are already fatigued in your legs and your quads. And I think that the leg press is an essential movement pattern of the lower body. It's kind of interchangeable with the squat. In fact, for me, it's like the more stabilized and locked into place version of a back squat or front squat, of a squat of any kind for that matter. The only real difference here is that you have back support, and therefore you don't have to actually use any stabilizers during the movement. You don't have to use your erector spinae, you don't have to use your core, you don't have to use your abs, any of that stuff in there. You don't have to use any of it, because you are being supported by the pad and by the seat here. And therefore you can just focus on the leg extension like we were talking about, and also on the hip flexion that occurs during this lift too. That's another major aspect of quad training, is hip flexion, which is worked during the leg press, during a squat movement of any sort. Now, you could totally change this out for a squat or do both if you're really feeling spicy, if you're feeling crazy. But for today's session, I am choosing to do the leg press. I'm gonna do 4 sets here, slow and controlled, really feeling it, to really drive home the quad growth that we're gonna achieve. By being locked in and so stable, like on a leg press, it's removing a lot of the other body parts from really getting in the way. For example, you're not working your glutes as much because you're not doing as much of a hip hinge or anything like that. So you're not actually having to do that hip extension. So your glutes are worked to a much smaller degree, as well as hamstrings. You're not working your hamstrings as much either. So it's more of an isolation lift for the quads, but it's not completely isolation lift by any stretch of the imagination, because you're using 2 different joints, using the knee joint and the hip joint while you're doing the lift, like I just mentioned earlier. So I think that it's a great substitution for a squat on a quad focused leg day. That one gave me the skin crawls. My arms are looking all red now and shit. That's something that I've been very conscious of and that I've been trying to do better about, is actually going balls to the wall on leg exercises. Because, guys, it's easy to go balls to the wall on upper body lifts, because upper body lifts are only locally fatiguing, versus legs are so, every fiber of your being will be screaming when you're approaching failure. It is attacking your cardiovascular system, your muscular system, among others. Versus if you're just doing like some chest flies or something, then you're only feeling it in your chest. You're not actually getting out of breath. Maybe to like a very small degree, but not anything that's really gonna mess with your set performance. And therefore, I think that on leg days, there's a huge mental barrier that you have to overcome in order to really succeed. You kind of have to find that like extra gear in order to really succeed with leg training. In fact, I heard this quote when I was going through Instagram Reels. This guy said, "Don't just count reps, make every rep count." And that is so powerful, in my opinion, because that's what I used to do, especially on leg days. You're just counting the reps, and once you hit 10 or 12 or whatever, you rack it. And that mindset is not going to get you very far. Yeah, you're checking off the box and stuff, but it's not about checking off the box, guys. It's about making every rep count. And I'm sure you noticed, I just unlocked like a new level of range of motion on leg press, which I never knew that I had. I really sank deep and got my legs all the way back. In the past, I've rarely ever done a focused leg day, just focusing on one muscle group over the others. I usually, since I first started lifting, like to balance it out pretty evenly, and even spread on each and every day. So like I would be doing, 8 sets of quads, 8 sets of hamstrings, and then 8 sets of glutes. Though I'd be counting a lot of the lifts of, like back squats, I'd be counting that as like half for glutes. And then like RDLs would be like full for glutes. And while I think that that's a great approach, it is very hard to keep up that level of volume from each leg day to another. And what ended up happening was my leg days were much longer for 2 reasons. For one, they were literally longer. Like I'd be doing more sets because there's so much going on in the lower body versus the upper body. You can kind of get away with some stuff. And on top of that, it's also just so much harder to do leg exercises. Like for the reasons I just mentioned, they're more systemically fatiguing. They're just going to beat you up, and they require a lot of rest and a lot of mental resilience. And while going balls to the wall in one session is fine, when you have to do it like twice or 3 times a week, whatever your program demands, for your whole life potentially, that's where the mentality, while it can last a long time, it's not going to last forever. You're not going to always be like ready to hit your legs with as much vigor and intensity as you could on your best day. You know what I mean? So that's why I think that quad focused leg days, hamstring focused leg days, glute focused leg days can really shine, permitted that you are throwing in an exercise of the antagonistic muscle group. So like I did hamstring curls just to get in a little bit of hamstring volume. And I think that that is very important if you're choosing to do it this way. And I'm actually going forward, I'm going to be doing this way for a little bit. I'm going to be doing a quad focus day and then a hamstring focus day and see how my body responds. And a lot of lifting is just trial and error, messing around in the gym, finding out what you like, finding out what you're passionate about, and ultimately finding out what your body really latches onto and what makes it feel the best. So let's get one more set going. All right, guys, that's going to conclude this video, which was all about quad focused leg days and how to structure them and how to get the most out of them. Now I'm going to do some calf raises off camera. I'm going to do some standing calf raises and some calf raises right here inside of the leg press machine. I just want to quickly recap what we discussed today, because we did go over a lot. If my memory serves me correctly, we started with the quad extension machine, and I highlighted the benefits of that, how it can be a great warm-up / pre-exhaust movement. And I discussed what I deem to be proper form and some enhancements, like you could lean your torso back further in the machine, that is, so that you can achieve the greatest stretch that you possibly can. And then we went to some seated hamstring curls, and I talked about how breaking up your quad movements with an antagonistic muscle group right in the middle can be a great idea to conserve some of that energy that you have floating around. Keep those mitochondria nice and strong. And I talked about proper form on that, how you should probably be leaning forward to achieve a greater stretch on the hamstrings. And then I talked about tempo and all that jazz. And then lastly, we went over to the leg press, and I said how essential of a movement pattern it is, how it can be kind of like a replacement for a squat in some regard, but it's more of, it's a compound lift like squats, that is, but it is more focused on just using your quads, because it's taking the core out of it, it's taking the back out of it, it's taking the coordination and balance component out of it, and it's super, super stable. So you can just really focus on, leg flexion and leg extension as well. So you can really just get the functions of the quads in spades. And then we just talked a little bit about some mentality perspective, some mindset stuff, and how like doing this type of training routine can be very beneficial for some people. So anyways, guys, that's a little recap, and I hope that you enjoy this one. I hope that it's giving you some food for thought, and thank you for your continued support, and have a good night. Have a good one. Bye.